I have kept the compact's line ledgers for 31 years. I have closed the accounts of 4 campaigns, 2 of them against species who believed, as we once believed, that courage was a substitute for arithmetic. I have never lost a forecast by more than 4%. I say this not as a boast. I say it so you understand the size of what happened at Ferris Station 9, and why a man who trusts numbers the way other men trust gods came home from that ridge with his hands shaking and his model in ashes. Understand our doctrine first, or nothing after will land. A Sethuran soldier carries his hemolymph in a sealed vascular tree keyed at the cellular level to the individual. It cannot be shared. It cannot be replaced. A physician can slow a leak. He cannot fill what is drained. Lose a third of it and the tree collapses, the keying fails, and the body forgets how to hold pressure. We call that being closed. A closed soldier is not necessarily a dead soldier. Many of them live for years afterward, thin and gray and unable to stand a full watch, but he is finished as a unit of force. He goes off the line and he does not come back onto it. The ledger marks him with a horizontal stroke and the account moves on. From this fact, the whole architecture of compact warfare descends. A battle is a subtraction problem. You possess a quantity of force. Your enemy possesses a quantity of force. You purchase reductions in his quantity by expending your own, and the war ends when one column reaches a number too small to defend the position it holds. Everything else, the maneuvering, the artillery, the songs the Kurith auxiliaries sing when the guns warm up, is decoration on the sum. I have said as much to young officers who found the idea distasteful. Distaste is not an argument. The sums are the war. So when the line directorate sent me to Tamber Reach to forecast the reduction of Ferris Station 9, I did not expect to be there long. The station itself was nothing, a played-out ore terminal on a chalk ridge above a dry basin, 6 kilometers of collapsed galleries, a crushing house, a rail spur that went nowhere since we had taken the junction 60 kilometers east. It possessed no strategic weight of its own. It sat, however, athwart the only graded approach to the Kelvish Plateau, and so it had to be reduced, and the human garrison in it had to be closed. I was given the garrison's number on my first morning. 410 effectives, established by 3 independent sources, a signals intercept, an overflight count of the ration pallets they had cached before we closed the ring, and the Kurith liaison's own estimate, which she produced by some method she declined to explain, and which I have never known to be wrong. 410. Against them, Field Commander Asan Varith had 2,000 of the compact's line infantry, a battery of gradient guns, and the Kurith, who do not count themselves and would not tell you if they did. I took my instruments into the tabulation deck, a canvas roof over a plank floor, 6 meters behind the forward optic post, smelling of hot dust and lamp oil, and I built the model. Rate of fire, rate of exposure, ammunition expenditure per confirmed reduction, the chalk of the ridge which fragmented under our shells and made secondary wounds, the station's water which came from a single sunk well we had not been able to poison. I ran the figures twice, and then a third time because the number that came out was so unromantic that I distrusted it. 31 days. In 31 days the human garrison would fall below the threshold of 200 effectives, at which point they could no longer man both the crushing house and the western gallery mouth, and Varith's assault companies would go up the chalk, and it would be finished before evening. I signed the forecast. Varith read it, grunted, and said what commanders always say, which is that he hoped I was wrong by a week in his favor. I told him I hoped for nothing. Hope is a rounding error. For 22 days I was right. I want to be very clear about that, because everything I say afterward will sound like the confession of a man who never understood his own trade. For 22 days the model held inside 3%. We bled them at the rate I had predicted. Our gradient guns walked the ridge every dawn and every dusk. Our marksmen took the water detail. Our sappers pushed the forward saps to within 80 meters of the western gallery, and the humans came out at night to knife them, and we killed the humans who came out. I sat under my canvas roof with my ledger open, and I recorded reductions the way a clerk records rain. I had a system for it. Human field discipline gave me their designators, which was a gift they did not know they were giving. They wore their names on their chests. They spoke them aloud on unencrypted casualty channels because the wounded must be identified and the identification must be fast. We listened. My assistant, a thin second-year tabulator named Sec, transcribed the intercepts, and I entered each name against a reduction with the date, the sector, and because I am thorough, and because thoroughness is the only virtue an accountant is permitted, the reported severity. 61 names by day 10, 140 by day 18, 206 by day 22. 206 from 410 leaves 204. That is below my threshold. On day 22, I should have watched the Western Gallery go quiet. On day 22, the Western Gallery fired 1,100 rounds and killed 9 of our sappers. Vareth came to my deck that night. He is not a subtle man, and he did not make a subtle entrance. He stood in the gap of the canvas with the lamps behind him and asked me, in a voice pitched for the whole staff to hear, whether the directorate had sent him a forecaster or a poet. I told him I would audit. I want to describe the audit properly because it is the center of this account, not the fighting. There was a great deal of fighting at Ferris Station 9 and almost none of it matters. The center of this account is a thin second-year tabulator, a lamp, a stack of intercept transcripts, and a question that took me 9 hours to permit myself to ask. The obvious explanations went first, as obvious explanations do. Perhaps the garrison had been larger than 410. I tested it. Their ration cache, their water draw, their latrine sumps, the density of their fire, all 4 constrained the original count within 20. A garrison of 600 could not have hidden its waste from us. Perhaps they were reinforcing. I tested it. We held the ring. The Kurith held the ring, and the Kurith do not sleep in any sense that we would recognize. Nothing had crossed. We had shot down 2 lifters attempting to land on the crushing house roof in the second week and burned a third on its approach. And after that they had stopped trying. Perhaps my intercepts were false, the humans nomming the same casualty twice, or nomming dead men who did not exist, to inflate my confidence and slacken our pressure. That was the explanation I wanted, and I hunted it for 2 full days. Sec built a cross-index of every designator against every reduction, and we searched for duplicates. We found duplicates. That is what broke me. Not doubled names on the same day. Names that appeared on the casualty channel on day 6, and again on day 14, and again on day 20. Names logged as reduced, entered in my ledger with the horizontal stroke, and then present again on the wire 8 days later, not as a memorial, not as a dead man being spoken of, but as a voice giving a range correction on a fire net. I had a name for the first one. I have it still. Corporal T. Ojda, Western Gallery, reported on day 6 with a wound to the thigh, and the human on the casualty channel had used a phrase our lexicographers had translated as arterial and flagged as terminal, and I had closed him. On day 14, Corporal T. Ojda called a gradient gun impact 40 meters short and asked, in a voice as bored as a man reading a fuel gauge, for the next serial to be walked left. I told Sec he had mistranscribed. Sec, who was frightened of me, said nothing for a long moment, and then said that he had checked it 4 times, and that there were 19 more. 19 more. 19 designators that I had struck out of the human account and that had come back onto it, and once I permitted myself to see the pattern I could not stop seeing it. It was not 19. 19 were the certain ones, the ones where the wound had been called terminal on the wire and the voice had returned. Beneath them lay a great gray mass of names logged with lesser wounds, hit, down, evac, which I had assessed at fractional reductions according to the standard compact tables, because in our tables, a wounded soldier is a soldier who will be closed by degrees and never returns to full duty. The tables were built on our vasculature. I had applied them to a body I had never studied. I sat under the canvas with the lamp guttering, and I did the only arithmetic that mattered. If human wounded returned, not the light ones, the heavy ones, the ones bleeding out on a fire step, then my 206 reductions were not 206. They were a number I could not compute, because I did not know the rate of return, and the rate of return was the only variable in the whole model that I had never thought to include. There is no term for it in the compact's doctrine. Our language does not have the word. You cannot build a word for a thing your species has never done. I went to Vareth at dawn and told him that his enemy's strength was unknown to me, that it had been unknown to me since the first week, and that every shell we had fired had been aimed by a man who did not know what he was shooting at. He listened. To his credit, and I did not credit him at the time, he did not shout. He looked out at the chalk ridge going pink in the early light, and he asked me what I required. I said I required to see it happen. The forward optic post at Ferris Station 9 sat in a chalk cut with a roof of sandbags and stolen rail ties, and it looked up the eastern face at a distance of 410 meters, which is a number I noted at the time and disliked. The optic itself was a compact long glass, a good instrument, gyro-stabilized, with a thermal overlay that rendered living bodies as pale shapes in a gray field. I took the post at second watch on day 24, and I did not leave it for 19 hours. For most of those hours I saw the war I expected. Our gradient guns walked their serials along the crest. Chalk went up in white plumes and came down as dust and grit. Human firing positions opened, fired, and shut. Nothing moved on that slope that did not have a reason. At the 11th hour, a human went down in the open. He had been running a length of communications wire between the crushing house and a forward position in the collapsed gallery mouth, a job that required him to cross 9 meters of exposed chalk where the ridge shouldered out. Our marksman watched that shoulder the way a man watches a doorway. He was 2 steps from cover when the round took him. I saw the impact through the thermal as a sudden bloom of heat at the hip, and I saw him fold, and I saw him try twice to rise and fail twice, and then lie still with one arm underneath him and his legs in the light. He was closed. In any compact formation on any world I have ever surveyed, he was closed. His people would leave him. That is not cowardice. It is arithmetic. To recover a man who cannot be restored is to purchase a corpse with living soldiers, and no officer of the compact would authorize the trade, and no soldier of the compact would expect him to. We would have marked his position, and after dark, if the sector went quiet, we would have sent a recovery detail to bring in his rifle and his optics and his identity plate. The rifle first. The rifle can be issued again. The humans came for him in 40 seconds. The first one came out of the gallery mouth low and fast, and our marksman on the shoulder hit her before she had covered 3 meters, and she went down on her face and did not get up. The second came out over her. He did not stop. He got a hand into the wounded man's harness and he pulled, and he had moved him perhaps 1.5 meters when the marksman hit him too, high in the back, and he dropped across the first man's legs. I remember thinking, with the pure clean contempt of a man watching a stranger throw money into a fire, they have spent 3 for 1, and the one was already spent. Then the smoke came. They had pots of it, and they threw them from the gallery mouth without exposing an arm, and the wind on that ridge at that hour ran south to north, and in 90 seconds the shoulder of the chalk was a white wall through which my thermal showed me shapes and my glass showed me nothing. Through the thermal I watched 4 more come out. I watched 2 of them go down. I watched the remaining 2 drag 3 bodies, 3, not 1, back across the 9 meters of open chalk and into the gallery mouth, one man hauling by the harness and the other walking backward, firing. 11 minutes later, the smoke thinned and the shoulder was empty except for our own dust settling, and the human fire net came up on the casualty channel with a string of designators, and Sec, in the tabulation deck below me, wrote them down. 6 names. I sat in that chalk cut with my eye against the glass for a long time. My hands were steady. I want that recorded because it is the last hour in which they were. What I had watched was not courage. I have seen courage. Courage is a Kurith drone standing on a burning gantry, or one of Varith's sergeants walking a broken squad back into a gradient barrage because he has been told to. Courage is an expenditure. It has a price, and the man paying it knows the price. What I had watched was an investment. Those humans had gone out into open fire twice and had come back with 3 bodies at the cost of 2 more of their own. In the arithmetic I had spent 31 years perfecting, that transaction was insane. It only ceased to be insane if the 3 bodies they carried back were not bodies. If the men they carried in were, in some sense my species has no word for, recoverable. If the wounded man on the chalk was not a debt but an asset, and if going out to fetch him was not a purchase but a retrieval. Every human who had crossed that ground had done so as though he were picking up a dropped rifle. I went down to the tabulation deck and I told Sec to strike nothing, not one more name. I told him to open a second ledger and to enter every human designator with the date and the wound and no stroke at all, no closure, no reduction, nothing but the fact of the report. He asked me what the second ledger was called. I told him it did not have a name yet. Then I went and found the bioregistry. Surgeon taxonomist AlienEncounter had been attached to Varith's staff for the campaign, and she had spent the siege in a dugout full of jars, doing the work the registry does everywhere, cataloging the local fauna, and when a human corpse came into our lines intact, cataloging that. She was old, older than me, with the modeling on her carapace that the very old get, and she had the registry's habit of answering a question with a longer question. I asked her what she knew about human vasculature. She said it was open. I asked her to explain the word. She said that a human's blood was not keyed, that it circulated in a system of remarkable pressure and remarkable redundancy, but that its cells carried only a coarse set of surface markers. She had catalogued 8 in the samples she had, and suspected more, and that within the compatible groups defined by those markers, human blood was, and here she paused and looked at me over the rim of the jar she was holding, interchangeable. I did not understand. I asked her to say it again in a way that could be entered in a ledger. She set the jar down. She said, "The blood of one human, taken out of that human's body and put into the body of another human, will circulate there. It will carry oxygen there. The recipient's body will not reject it if the coarse markers agree." She said she had seen the marks of it in 3 cadavers, the puncture in the crook of the arm, in the vein at the neck, in the great vessel under the collarbone, and had recorded them as ritual scarification, because no other explanation had presented itself to her, and because she had assumed, as I had assumed, as every one of us had assumed, that no organism would evolve so grotesque a vulnerability. To carry the machinery to accept a stranger's blood is to carry the machinery for every parasite and every plague that stranger has. It is a door with no lock. I asked her what it would mean, on a ridge in a siege. Neravin was silent for a while. I have thought about that silence often. She was the only one of us at that hour who was in a position to see the whole shape of it, and she was a scientist, and scientists are slower to be frightened because they are obliged to be sure first. She said, it would mean that exsanguination is not terminal. It would mean that the wound which closes a sethurin, the leak, the fall in pressure, the failure of keying is, for them, a shortage, and a shortage can be made up if you have a supply. I asked her the only question that remained. I asked her where a besieged garrison, ringed for 24 days, cut off from every lifter, would find a supply of human blood. She looked at me with her old flat eyes and she said, "From humans." We took the lifter on day 26. It came in low from the west over the dry basin, running without lights, hugging the ground so closely that the Kurth pickets felt it before the optics found it. It was not a troop transport. Varith's staff assumed it was, and the gradient battery engaged it as one, and I have never been able to decide whether it would have been better for the compact if they had missed. They did not miss. A gradient shell took the lifter's port lift fan at 90 meters, and it went into the basin floor at an angle on its side and slid 300 meters through the salt crust and stopped. It did not burn. That is important. 90% of what I am about to tell you would have been ash if that hull had burned. Varith sent 2 companies to it, expecting a fight over reinforcements. Instead, the humans in the station opened every gun they had and put down a barrage on the basin floor to keep us off the wreck. They fired for 2 hours. They fired ammunition they could not replace into open ground at nothing, to keep our men away from a downed lifter that carried no soldiers. That was the second time in 3 days that I watched humans spend force to protect something that my model said had no value, and by then I had learned to read the spending as a message. When they burn what they cannot replace, they are telling you what the thing is worth. I told Varith so. He looked at me the way commanders look at accountants who have begun, unforgivably, to speak of meaning. The barrage ran dry near midnight, and our people went out onto the salt with cutters and lamps. I went with them. I had no business there. I was a third forecaster of the line directorate, and my place was under canvas with a lamp, and Varith said as much, and I went anyway, and he let me. I think he had begun to be afraid, and I think he wanted his accountant to see whatever there was to see, so that if the numbers were going to eat someone alive, it would be a man who was already ruined by them. The lifter's flank had split along a seam. The crew were dead. 2 humans in the forward compartment, both closed by the impact, one still strapped, one not. The cargo bay behind them was full of cases. They were not ammunition cases. I had seen 10,000 ammunition cases. These were smaller, ribbed, and cold enough that the salt dust had frosted on their lids, cold enough that when the sappers cracked the first one open, the air that came out fogged in the lamplight and made a man step back. Inside, in racks, were pouches. Each pouch held perhaps half a liter of a dark red fluid, nearly black in the lamps. Each was flat, soft, and heavy in the hand, and each was printed with a block of human characters. There were 40 pouches in the case. There were, we established before dawn, 360 cases in the bay. I stood on the salt crust in the cold, with one of those pouches in both hands, and I did not need Naravin to tell me what it was, and she came out to the wreck anyway. At my request, and she told me. She read the printing to me through a lexicon. She read it 3 times, and the 3rd time she read it slowly, and I remember exactly the order in which the facts arrived, and the order in which they took me apart. The first line was a course marker group, that I had expected. It is the sort of thing one prints on a substance that must be matched. The second line was a date, a drawing date 91 days prior and an expiry 31 days hence. That too I could absorb. Perishable stores have dates. The third line was a place, not this world, not this system. A collection point in a city on a planet whose name our lexicon rendered as a 2-syllable sound, and whose location Naravin later established as 11 light-years from the salt I was standing on. The fourth line was a designator, and beneath it a number. I asked her what the designator was. She said it was a name. I asked her whose. She said the human this was taken from. I said that I did not understand. I said it in a voice I did not recognize. I said, the man in the station, the wounded man, this is his own blood, drawn from him before the siege and stored against his need. And Naravin, who was old, and who had spent 2 days with the lexicon and the cadavers, and had gotten there before me, said no. She said the name on the pouch was not a soldier's designator. It carried no rank, no unit, no service number. She said that 400 pouches in the first 11 cases carried 400 different names, and that not one of them matched any designator we had ever taken off the wire at Ferris Station 9, or off any wire in any engagement in this war. She said the fifth line was the only one she could not translate with confidence, because the lexicon offered 2 readings, and she had spent an hour deciding which. The characters were 3 words long. The first reading was given without payment. The second reading was donation. I asked her, and I could hear that my voice had gone flat and quiet, the voice I use for reading out a total that no one in the room wants. I asked her what the number under the name was. She said it was a count, a tally of prior occasions. On the pouch in my hands, the number was 41. 41 times, some human on a world 11 light-years away, who had never stood on chalk, who did not know that Ferris Station 9 existed, who would never learn the name of the man whose thigh had opened on the shoulder of that ridge, had walked into a collection point and opened a vein and given away half a liter of the fluid that kept him alive. For nothing, to no one, to a stranger. And the compact had shot down the lifter carrying it, and the men in the station had fired every shell they owned into empty ground to keep us from it. And I was standing on a salt flat at 3 in the morning, holding a cold pouch of a stranger's blood in both hands. And for the first time in 31 years, I could not make my sums close.